Kenya, 1977. It had started well, the day that Hannah's world shifted on its axis, to spin out of its familiar orbit. It was the day she had left Langani Farm to travel to Europe for the first time. The day that her daughter vanished for the first time. The day that doubt crept into her sense of belonging for the first time, to gnaw at the core of all that she held dear. She rose before dawn on that morning, leaving the bedroom with unaccustomed stealth, not wanting to wake Lars, who was snoring lightly through the last hour of his sleep. He had held Hannah close during the night, unable to quell his excitement, although he was not a man to express extremes of feeling. "We will have the best times," Lars said, "seeing the other half of our children's heritage, the farm where I grew up, and a different set of mountains rising from the blue waters." Lars pushed his fingers into her thick blonde hair, loosened from the braid that hung down her back during the daytime. "You are going to fall in love with Norway," he said, "and the children will think they are in heaven." "They're pretty close to heaven right here," Hannah said, "although I don't know how we will persuade Sunniva to behave like a normal European child. She looks so pretty now that she's 11 years old, but she is such a tomboy. It will be a battle to convince her that she should keep her shoes on and comb her hair and wear a dress sometimes, instead of running around in those tatty old shorts and tackies like a Toto from the labour lines." "She can wear whatever she likes," Lars said, smiling. "Her feet will sink into the softest grass you can imagine. I can see her walking through the wildflowers in the meadows. Pete can learn to row and to sail, and we'll have the best shrimps that you've ever eaten." "You mustn't spoil them so much," she said, smiling at him. "Get them used to things they never have at home." "It is their first trip outside Kenya," he said, running his finger lightly across her face. "And this first time for you in Europe, staying with Camilla in London, seeing her as her celebrity model queen of the fashion world base. So I am certainly planning to spoil you all, yeah, and starting with it right now." "Oh, go to sleep," she pushed him away, laughing as he reached underneath her pajamas. "I have to leave up early in the morning to check the packing." "Come here, Han," he said, kissing her earlobe and feeling her resolve evaporate. His voice was pitched in the special tone that he used for love-making as he brought her close. "Ach, Lars, I don't know what you're thinking of," she said, putting her arms around his neck. "Sometimes you have no sense at all." Hannah was warmed by that memory as she made her way through the silent house into the garden, with its scent of jasmine and the sighing of the wind in the trees. The dogs followed her, expectant, whining softly as she opened the door onto the veranda, disappointed when she shook her head and left them behind. Outside, the night watchman murmured a greeting, and she heard the call of a nightjar in the chilly stillness. The last stars glittered in the sky, and the smell of rain hung in the air. She hoped another downpour would not turn the road into an ooze of red mud, sucking at the tires and causing the car to sway and maybe go into a pothole or a ditch. They would have to leave early in case of unexpected delays. She started the Land Rover and moved slowly out of the garage, keeping the engine noise low and not turning on the headlights until she had rounded the curve of the driveway. Then she changed gear, picked up speed along the track, and went to the ridge. The sky was stained with scarlet and gold, the beginnings of blue appearing by the time that she had parked at the foot of the rocky incline. As she climbed the last few hundred yards, the distant silhouette of the mountain stood before her, dark and high, ragged against the glowing light, and she sensed that the great god Ngai was watching her solitary pilgrimage. The earth felt ancient and familiar beneath her feet, and in the distance she could see the glimmer of early morning fires as men and women appeared from the thatched huts of the fair farm's labour lines to prepare for the day. Below her, on the viewing platform at Langani Lodge, 2 of the guests had come out to watch a group of elephant at the waterhole. 3 generations of her family had passed this way before her, scrambling up the loose scree to the ridge, which had been her brother's favourite place. Pete had come up here to dream, looking out over the farm with his great-grandparents had carved from the devouring wilderness, planning what he would do when his turn came to tend and protect the land. It was on the ridge that he had asked Sarah to marry him, and it was here that he had died, under the cold, pitiless eye of the African night. Sarah was the one who had suggested building the cairn in his memory, and over time Hannah had learned to look upon this memorial as a refuge where his spirit remained to guide and comfort her. The air was charged with beauty and purpose, and the sounds of the bush began to swell around her. She sat down on the cool stones of the cairn, beneath the tortoise tree that Lars had planted on the place where Pete's funeral pyre had flared in the obscene brightness of that terrible morning. "We're leaving today, Pete," she said, aloud, "on the visit to Europe that we've talked about for so long. And Lars and the children and me. I can't believe we're going to London and Norway. I'm a little nervous. Even in Nairobi I sometimes feel like a bumpkin, a plain Afrikaans farm girl in the middle of all those fancy people. But it will be a wonderful thing for us, and I can feel the thrill of it already. So I've come to say goodbye, for a while, to say that I love you, and I know you'll watch over the farm while we are gone." His answer came to her in the hum of the wind, through the bird calls that he had known so well, and from the sounds of the animals grazing on the plains below her. She drove back to the house, her mind at rest, taking the track along the bright coil of the river, passing herds of zebra and gazelle, and a pair of jackals trotting across the plain after a night's hunting. By the time she got to the house, the promise of a fine day was fading, and a drift of cloud had hooked itself over the mountain's sharp summit, stealing the blue from the sky and bringing a tinge of gloom to the morning. She stood on the lawn, breathing in the scent of rain in the last moment before everything changed. "Hannah," Lars was standing on the veranda with Pete beside him. "Sunniva's not in her bedroom. She's not even in the house, Han." "So where is she?" Hannah tried to read the signal in his eyes. "Sunniva has run away," Pete blurted out the words, "because she won't go without James. Not to the other farm or on the aeroplane to London, and we can't go without her." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Hannah said, exasperated. "I can't believe she would pull this kind of stunt on the morning we're leaving." Pete balled his fists, steeling himself against tears. "What is the matter with this boy?" The old retainer came out. Mwangi, the old retainer, came out, looking at Pete, his wrinkled face full of concern. "Pete thinks his sister has run away," Hannah said. "Have you seen her this morning, Mwangi?" The old man shook his head, and she turned back to Lars. "Well, she must be with Esther and James." Hannah's annoyance was rising. "I'll go to the staff quarters and bring her back." In the staff compound, she stepped over several broody chickens and knocked on Esther's door. There was no response. She rapped again, loud and impatient. She was shivering in the cold air now, shaking the first drops of rain from her hair, aware that several of the Watu had come out from their houses and were watching curiously. When Esther appeared, she was tying her headscarf back behind her ears, her cardigan open over the flannel nightgown that had been a Christmas gift. "I've come to fetch Sunniva," Hannah said, frowning and a worm of disquiet curdling her stomach. "She's not in the house, so she thinks she must be here with you and James." Hannah strode across the room to James's bedroom and opened the door. There was a mound in the centre of the bed. "Wake up, James." Hannah pulled back the bedclothes to reveal two lumpy pillows pushed into the shape of a sleeping form. "Ay, yeah!" Esther's exclamation was one of frightened astonishment. "Where the hell are these children?" Hannah's alarm sharpened her voice, but it was obvious that Esther had no idea. Fear and frustration shook her. "They must have left in the dark. It's only 3 nights ago that a leopard took one of the dogs. Think, Hester. Where would they have gone?" She grabbed the ayah's hands. "Please, think." "I do not know. They like to be in the forest looking for birds or following a spoor. This is the worst place they could choose. You'd better come and look after Pete while we start searching for them." Hannah ran back to the house, taking the veranda steps 2 at a time. Lars was waiting, pacing through the living room. "She's not with Esther," he said, "and neither is James. What is all this that Pete has been saying about Sunniva not wanting to go away?" "She made a big fuss a few days ago," Hannah said. "She wanted to know why James's suitcase wasn't packed, and when she realised he was staying here, she burst into tears and started shouting at me and said she wouldn't go unless James came too." "I suppose we could have expected something like this sooner or later," Lars said. "Those two are inseparable, and we haven't discussed the question of James and his place in the family, now that he's old enough for it to matter." "Oh, what are you talking about?" Hannah brushed an impatient hand across her forehead. "James is protected, secure, he has a roof over his head, he knows that we love him, He goes to school with the other farm children, and he spends the rest of the time with Sunniva and Pete. That is his place in the family.